I wanted to share with y'all a few things that I have consistently incorporated into my daily lifestyle and beyond, good nutrition, beyond regular exercise. These are a few key things that have really helped me to elevate to the next level and that I find a benefit both physically and mentally as well.
Yay Networks.
A quick note before we dive into today's podcast. If you like what you hear, I would love for you to subscribe to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, wherever you download your podcast. It would also be incredible if you take a minute to rate and review this podcast. Those things do matter and they really help us. I'm Molly Kimball. Welcome to Fueled, a wellness and nutrition podcast. I'm a registered dietitian and nutrition journalist with a passion to help people live their strongest, healthiest life possible. In my weekly TV segments and columns, there's a limited amount of time and space to cover everything, but there's so much more to share. This podcast is my opportunity to dive deeper into the topics you want to know about. As this episode is dropping, it is Thursday, January 25th, and it also happens to be my birthday. I am turning 49 today, and it's crazy, just wild to me to think that in 1 year, I'll be turning 50. It just seems like, how's that even possible? And so that's not really the point of what today's episode is about. But it just happens to be, as I was looking at the date, I was like, wow, I'm recording it a few days in advance, but I was like, as it drops, it'll be my birthday, turning 49. And also kind of looking at the January, the reset. My friend Ben McLaughlin and I, at the end of the year, we did a little summary looking ahead to 2024 and looking at, if you're not big into resolutions, or even if you are, maybe kind of rethinking things and instead looking at it as a reset. And we talked about an article that I did for Avenue Magazine. I'll link to it also in this particular episode that really covers 12 habit shifts, habit changes to think through for 2024. Some may be a fit for you, some may not. And so I thought that I would use this episode to share with y'all a few things that really personally benefit me and that I believe in and that I've been really consistent with for some time. And a couple of them are things that Ben and I touched on really briefly. Some of them are not included in that 12-month, reset recap. So I'm hoping that you find some benefit in this. The first, I was thinking of where do I start? I think the first one that I'll talk about is creatine. There's three that immediately come to mind: creatine, collagen, and continuous glucose monitors. I do want to talk a little bit about intermittent fasting. I do a little bit of a modified version of that. And then also sugars. I think that we just can't emphasize enough the importance of keeping the added sugars out. But I think probably won't spend too much time on that. I think that I really want to spend our time on collagen, creatine, touch on the intermittent fasting and continuous glucose monitors. These are things that if you're thinking I'm already doing things pretty well, or you've kind of got things, a pretty solid game plan, but maybe where are there areas that things could improve or just tighten up a little bit or kind of give yourself that little extra edge nutritionally. These are the things that I would say. So starting with creatine, I was talking with my friend Hank Allen with WGNO just a few days ago, and we had done a segment on sort of, kind of like what are the things that pull people off track over the new year, and what are some things to kind of think through. And off camera, he was asking me, what about creatine? And he's recently been reading more about benefits of it well beyond kind of the bodybuilder mentality. And, I told him that, yes, I take it. I've been taking it for several years now. And other friends of mine, colleagues of mine, women, men, all ages have also been taking it. And the reason is there's so much more research that has come out over the past decade than what we had before. So in short, I'll kind of touch on a few of these points. I wanted this to be sort of like a short and sweet episode of here's a few things that I find really helpful. And I can link to, I've done deeper, lengthier podcasts on some of these topics. So creatine, years ago, we thought about it as, it's for bodybuilders, it was for football players. And it wasn't something that I would have thought that I would start taking. And the research, though, over the past decade, it's looking that there's so much more benefit than we realized. It helps, one big reason that I'm taking it, why I recommend it to people in their 60s, 70s, and older to take it, is that it can help to reduce what's referred to as age related muscle loss. And so, just naturally as we get older, unless we are being really proactive nutritionally and exercise strength training wise, unless we're being really proactive, there's a natural decline in our muscle mass, and it's typically referred to. There's a term for it called sarcopenia or age related muscle loss, and taking creatine, supplementing with creatine, can help to reduce this. It helps to um, promote cognitive health, or boosting our brain health. It can also help with muscle recovery. I think that's kind of starts to get into the space that more people are familiar with creatine for. You think about creatine to help with that explosive power, to be able to lift more, train harder, but it also helps with that muscle recovery. So when we look at the benefits of creatine on reducing that age-related muscle loss, helping our brain health, our cognitive health, our memory, and then promoting that muscle recovery, and there's very little risk with it. It's almost like, why not? Now, always with these things, of course, check with your provider. Is there any reason that for you personally, there's a why not? But when we look at the negatives on it, we used to think that creatine really increased cramping and muscle cramping. That doesn't appear to be the case. So we look at those benefits that we talked about. There's also bone density. The potential to increase our bone density, or at least reduce our bone loss. So when we look at that, along with the muscle support that it's giving us, the memory and cognitive support that it's giving us, we look at, okay, what are the side effects? The side effects are minimal. For some, it might include GI upset, maybe nausea, if you're taking too much at a time. And when we talk about how much do I take, we used to think that we needed a load with 20, 25 grams a day for, a week or so, divided out through the day. Now what we're real, and there also used to be kind of like more prescriptive dosage related to body mass. For most of us though, if we just keep it super simple, we can say supplementing with 5 grams a day, even 3 to 5 grams a day, being very consistent with it, we can start to see and feel some of these benefits that we're talking about of creatine. So 5 grams a day is typically a scoop of a creatine powder. It usually comes with a little scoop in there. It's about a teaspoon-ish of that. 5 grams a day, you can take it anytime. You would want to take it separate from caffeine. Caffeine can inhibit the effectiveness of creatine. So supplementing with 5 grams a day, it can be at any time. We used to think it had to be right before a workout to help with that power, right after the workout if you wanted to help with recovery. But now we see that we can really take it at any time through the day. And as long as we're consistent taking it daily, we're going to reap those benefits. So for me personally, I do it first thing in the morning. That's the very first thing I do. And then there's some time, 45 minutes to an hour before I have that first cup of coffee. Probably would be ideal if I waited longer, but that for me is personally just kind of like what works in my normal routine. So that's one, creatine, one of those that sounds a little maybe intimidating, especially if we thought about it associated with kind of more of a bodybuilder or football player approach, but seeing more and more and more research on this to support for people in their 40s, 50s, and beyond taking it, women as well as men. Again, looking at potential for bone health, cognitive health, memory, reducing the muscle losses, helping with muscle recovery after a workout, all types of positives there. So that's one that I have been doing, I guess maybe about 3 years now. And it's when you're doing different things, it's hard to say exactly like what one change may bring, but I have felt that I have less fatigue around workouts, better recovery, less soreness, better strength gains, all of that. I would say I see the benefit of. Shifting gears to number 2, collagen. We've talked about this a lot, but I couldn't do a what am I doing now or what am I doing, not just now, what do I do consistently that I feel is beneficial. And I couldn't do that segment or this episode without including collagen in that conversation. So collagen is something that I've been supplementing with for maybe almost 20 years now. It was the early 2000s. It was like close to 2 decades ago. And back in the day, the popular brand now that we all see If you're familiar with collagen, you've probably seen Vital Proteins. They've done an amazing job of getting it into mainstream conversations, mainstream stores. The marketing, the branding, the social media is phenomenal. Jennifer Aniston is their chief creative officer. There's a lot of visibility of creatine now. 20 years ago, it was not the case at all. Great Lakes Collagen, which is still made today, it was one of the few brands that was there. You had I could really just usually find it online, sometimes at a health food store. But Great Lakes Collagen is still a really good brand. And so, what I would look at as far as brands, Great Lakes or Vital Proteins or Gain also has a really good brand. It's going to come down to what's at the stores that you're going to, what's the price point. A lot of times you can find something like Vital Proteins, for example, at Costco. So that might be kind of the deciding factor for you. But all three of those brands can be good. But 20 years ago, the reason I started taking it was joint health and ligament health. The potential for that. Very, very little research back then. Like there was almost all anecdotal conversation around it. Very little published research on collagen in the early 2000s. But the potential for improving joint health, improving ligament tendon health was the main reason that I started taking it. And sort of like we talked about with creatine, with collagen, there's even less risk. I mean, it's basically just a protein source. So even if you're not getting any of those specific benefits, you're still getting a good source of protein. So when we look at the conversation now, like we said, it's become more mainstream. It has become more visible. It's more accessible. You can find it at, a full spectrum of types of stores. The research has also come a long way. And so there's just so many more studies and, large meta-analyses that are looking at compiling multiple studies and compiling all of that data and looking to see what are the claims, what are the benefits that have science behind it. And of course, there's always, with most science, there's going to be some studies that show benefit. There's others that show little or no benefit. And most of the benefits that we're seeing, they're centered on either slowing or delaying the aging process in some way. And so from a aesthetic standpoint, it can help to improve our skin elasticity, the hydration of our skin, which in turn can help reduce the appearance of wrinkling. It can increase our skin's collagen content, the density of our skin. So these are all things that when we look at the aesthetic, the kind of the exterior aging process. When we look at how are we feeling inside of our bodies, supplementing with collagen along with regular exercise, stretching, being proactive with things, of course, like there's stretching, but then there's also things like trigger point rollers, massage, things that we can do that is keeping our fascia, those connective tissues, healthy. But supplementing with collagen along with these other healthy behaviors it appears that it's also helping to stimulate our body's own connective tissues, which can help with that joint stiffness. It can help with the functionality, that movement. It can help reduce that joint pain. There's also some evidence that collagen can help increase our bone strength, our bone density. So I'll link to, actually, I believe as this drops on the 25th, next week, I will have an article coming out in Avenue Magazine that goes deeper into this. I also link to a lot of the studies on that. I'll hold off on linking to that. So if you want to see the article that I'm pulling together specifically on collagen, click back to this link around February 1 or so, and I will have it in the show notes. I'll put the actual link. In the meantime, what I'll do is I'll just link to the Avenue Magazine site, but the article won't be live until next week. But I think that'll kind of go through a lot of the details, the ins and outs of collagen, linking to, and I have in there the brands and linking to the different studies on that. But on collagen, when we look at, okay, well, how much? Most studies that are looking at effectiveness are looking at 10 to 20 grams a day. Personally, I aim to get 20 grams a day. 20 grams is about the equivalent that you would get in 3 eggs worth of protein or about 3 ounces of lean meat. So I also like just getting that extra dose of 20 grams of protein. You could add this anytime through your day. It doesn't matter when it would be. The biggest thing is that it's got to be something that's a consistent time for you. And so for me, what I typically do is I'll put it in an afternoon coffee that I'll have. So I may have that afternoon cup of coffee, try not to have it too late, but I'll usually have a cup of coffee at some point after lunch in the early afternoon. And I'll put the collagen powder in that. It is, in theory, it's described as being odorless and tasteless, and it dissolves easily. It doesn't really change the flavor, the texture, or anything about the product. And I do think that that's the case in most things. Like if you put it in your smoothie, you probably wouldn't realize it. You wouldn't notice it at all. But those of us who really love our coffee, you'll notice it. It's like the slightest little bit of difference. In the afternoon, I'm ready for it. Like I'm fine with that in the afternoon. But in the morning, when I do have that first cup of coffee, I want it to be like just how I love it. And so I don't put the collagen in it in the morning. I'll usually wait. I'll do that in the afternoon. I don't know. For me, it's just a psychological thing. It'd be fine to do it in the morning too. It's also easy because I'm always there. I would have it consistently there. But I have a little container that I just put the 2 scoops in. It's just a little clip, like a little snap-on lid that is just an easy little portable container that has the equivalent of that 20 grams in there. So if I'm not at home, I can put that in there. I keep it at my office. I keep it different places so that it's convenient. So whenever that time is for you, whatever it is that you're doing consistently daily, is there a way that you can put your 20 grams of collagen powder into that, which is typically going to be like 2 scoops of those different brands that we talked about. So one is creatine. And like I said, I've been doing that only about 3 years now. But I don't see that I would stop it. And I've really been feeling the benefits from that. The second, collagen, like I said, has been probably right at about 20 years. And it's hard to say, do I think that that's helped with joint health, et cetera? From running, since high school on and having a lot of overuse injuries, hip and bursa type issues, I've always found that probably one of the most challenging things. I've always felt a lot of pain or soreness or limitations there. And so I kind of look at something like supplementing with collagen for all these years as every little bit helps. And if it is giving me that extra edge or that little bit of extra improvement, or maybe it's keeping it or has kept it from being even worse than it is, then I'll take it. So currently, like I don't run or do distance running. I find that has been just really hard on the joints, tendons, the bursa, like around my hips and such. And I'll feel just like a lot of soreness and stiffness for days after if I did have the occasion for that. I've mentioned before that I started taking tennis lessons a couple of years ago, and I was fearful of that for a long time because I thought that if running hurt, then tennis, that side to side movement, I was kind of nervous about like, how would that feel? And a few years ago, I just kind of started hitting with my husband who's played his whole life. And I realized that lateral side to side movement, it wasn't causing me that same pain that I had with that repetitive same motion, same stride of running. So for me, something like tennis lessons out on the court and that side to side movement has been something that has not caused pain. And I feel like, but I will say when I first started taking lessons, and from a husband and also from a coach, and because my husband's also a coach, but he's a coach of one, he's a coach of me, but also from a coach, I felt like if anybody's played tennis and you hadn't before, or if you could just if you're used to doing steady state cardio, walking or running or a cycling or spin type class, something like tennis is that high intensity, almost, it felt like these bursts of anaerobic periods. And I felt at first like it was really hard for me to keep my energy up. So going back to the creatine conversation, I started supplementing with creatine just a few months in to taking those tennis lessons. And I felt a really big difference, like almost right away. And so was it because I was becoming more conditioned on the court into that kind of workout? Possibly. But I also felt and saw a difference in strength, and just, again, the energy recovery, having that sustained energy during those workouts and those training sessions. So For both of those things, I feel like creatine, collagen has helped in both of those in areas like that of being able to take on a new hobby and train my body to do something new that I hadn't ever really done before. I mentioned turning 49 today. So I was um, 46 when I picked it up and I love it. And I was, again, for years thought, I don't know if my body or like the joints, if I'm having a hard time running, can I handle tennis? So it's been a really cool thing to see that, yeah, I can do that. Um, the other thing that I mentioned, yeah, I said there were several different things. Creatine's one, collagen's one. Intermittent fasting, I think I'll go there next. This is one that I do kind of, I guess, informally, and I do a modified version informally of intermittent fasting. It's not something that I do that is very, very strict. I'm not very strict about it. I'm very much a believer that the things that are happening in our lives and the people around our lives or the events that are coming up, that's going to be more important than sticking with a time structure of when we are or are not fasting or fueling. And so I say that to say that when I say it's a modified version of intermittent fasting, I'll talk about the benefits of why I choose that in a little bit. But um, I would never want it to interfere with what would otherwise be a really cool life experience, family experience, something with friends. So to me, that takes priority. So even though with intermittent fasting, I'm typically not having a breakfast, let's say, um, if we are somewhere and there is a breakfast event or someone's cooking it, or, my mother-in-law on vacation has whatever it is, I'm absolutely going to enjoy that, participate in that. I would never want to say, if you've listened to this podcast before, I don't love when someone says, I can't have something, I can't do that. I don't like that at all. I want to find ways that we can kind of work our choices and our nutritional and wellness choices into something that also supports all these other aspects. And so to me, experiencing these meals and these, different times that we would be spending with someone is more important. So with that, what do I mean by modified intermittent fasting? I'm actually going to do a podcast. I think I'm going to have it drop in March, talking in more depth about intermittent fasting. So I want to just kind of hit on the high spots on this for right now, of things that I do that I find beneficial. So coming up in March, I'll be doing a full episode on what does the science behind it show. Just like anything, there's research showing both benefits. There's a lot of research showing the benefits of intermittent fasting on improving blood pressure, our lipid profile, our glucose levels, our insulin levels, our body composition. There's a lot of research that shows benefit on that. There's other research that shows not a benefit compared to otherwise controlling calorie intake. What I find with intermittent fasting is, and we'll talk more about it, like I said, in March, I'll be doing a full episode on this. For me, there's several different reasons of why I find benefit in it. And one is actually GI wise. I've shared before on this podcast that I have IBS. And so, there's a whole lot that goes into that. And I had one of our gastro dietitians joining me, and we shared some of our stories. So you can scroll back and hear that from last year. But there's a lot there. So something like intermittent fasting, if I am pushing back when I'm eating into the day, it actually makes a really big difference on the level of GI upset or how that feels through the day, or different symptoms that I may have for managing that IBS. So for me, pushing it back, delaying it in the day helps me to manage those symptoms of IBS better. And so also, what I personally, my husband and I tend to eat dinner later. We try to have it earlier, but dinner is usually going to be sometime between 7 and 8:30, sometimes later, unfortunately. So I push that window back to allow for that. Now, I'll also say, when you look at intermittent fasting, and we'll talk more about this in March, but when you look at intermittent fasting, there's all different types. Sometimes it's based on the time of day. And so someone may choose to do a 16-hour fasting window and an 8-hour fueling window. And so it may be each day there's a fasting period and a fueling period. There's others where someone may do 5 days on, 2 days off. I'm not a big fan of, or sometimes it's alternating days. I'm not a big fan of that. To me, a lot that can kind of go into almost like a binging type mindset that I've seen with people when it's today's my fueling day and sort of all bets are off as far as health. So I don't love the alternating days. Also going back to what if you're getting together with your family that day or like your extended relatives, like, but it happens to be your fasting entire day of your fasting. So I don't love the days. I tend to gravitate more towards a window of time in our day that is our fasting time and a window that is the fueling time. And I'll link though in this, just if you want to start looking a little bit more, I'll link to some things that I've written and things that I've done before on intermittent fasting and sort of like the how-tos on it. But like I said, we'll be covering it way more in March. So I do the daily and pushing that fueling window back. The other kind of like and when I say it, I kind of do a modified intermittent fasting. When you look at the things that raise our glucose levels and therefore our insulin levels, it's primarily carbohydrates, but it's also proteins. And carbs raise our glucose and therefore our insulin, more significantly, proteins to a lesser amount. But fats really, they don't affect our glucose levels at all and really have a minimal, if any, influence on our insulin levels. So we can consume, if we consume something that is just fat, if you think about like olive oil and you have something that's just fats, we're not raising our glucose. Our glucose stays steady. Our insulin levels stay steady. So one of the big benefits of intermittent fasting, there is the GI rest that we talked about. There's also the keeping your insulin levels really low for that extended time throughout the day, whether it's that 16-hour fasting window or whatever that might be. Keeping our insulin levels really low during that time can be beneficial for helping with inflammation, helping with brain health, helping to possibly mitigate our risk for things like Alzheimer's and the plaques that it form that are linked to things like Alzheimer's disease. So there's a lot of benefit of keeping our insulin levels in check, keeping our insulin levels kind of steady and low versus having these spikes of insulin. So when we look at, okay, if we're having something that's mostly fats and not having that carb or protein during that fasting window, we're still keeping our insulin level really low. So is it true fasting? No, because we're having calories. But personally, I do so much through the day and I feel that I'm active and burning a lot of calories through the day on most days. I don't want to go a really long time without any calories at all. So when I do that modified fast, I'm putting fats in earlier in the day, but I'm trying to limit the carbs or even hold off a little bit until later in the day for protein type foods. So what does that mean? It might look like using a coconut milk or coconut oil, for example. Some people, you'll hear people putting coconut oil in their coffee. I'll actually use just a splash of real cream in my coffee. It is the animal fats. It's also very low in carbohydrate or almost very close to zero carbohydrate, very low protein. And it is primarily just fats. And I just like it better than putting coconut oil in my coffee. Kind of going back to it's that first cup of the day and you want it to be how you want it. I had tried coconut oil and using the little immersion blender. It just, I could do it later in the day. Again, it's not my preference first thing in the morning. So doing a little bit of real cream gives me the fats there. I may have things like macadamias or avocados, things that they do have maybe a little bit of carb in them, but it's going to be primarily fats. So those are things that you may, a lot of times in my morning meetings, I'll have some roasted macadamias and I'll have that. I have that coffee with a little bit of that real cream in there. So I am getting calories. I'm just trying to minimize the carbs, minimize the protein until later in the day. as part of that fasting window, if that makes sense. So when I say that I kind of do the modified intermittent fasting, it is still having fats during that fasting window, especially in the first half of the day, because I don't want to go such a long time without having those calories. So to me, I just don't think that everyone's different, and everyone's different in what their bodies or their energy level or their activity level can sustain. So some people do find a true benefit from completely fasting from all types of calories during that fasting window. For me, though, from a GI perspective, a gastrointestinal perspective, also from an energy perspective, um, I've found, and keeping enough calories in, I've found that I like the way that I feel having primarily those fats during that early morning kind of fasting window, and then shifting and having it more, you know, introducing the proteins and the carbs later in the day. Again, full episode coming on this, but I wanted to just kind of like give a snapshot of this. So when I'm looking at, okay, what are some of the things that I do on the regular that I feel really help me? Creatine, collagen, intermittent fasting. I won't get into sugars really, but that is one that I really, really, really watch added sugars. I find that from an energy perspective, it just helps me stay way more steady and level than to have these ups and downs, these swings and crashes. And then the last thing is continuous glucose monitor. I know if you listen to this podcast, you're like, again, Molly, with the continuous glucose monitor, CGM, as people refer to it. Yes, 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 yes. I will link to one of the episodes that I did a while back on it. It is now NutriSense. I love the way the app interfaces. It makes it so easy to engage with the app and see your glucose levels in real time, and how the food that you eat, maybe the stress that you're feeling, the exercise you're doing, the sleep or the lack of sleep, all of that in real time. You're seeing how does it affect your glucose levels, what's spiking you, what's keeping you level. And NutriSense is my favorite. It's the sensor is one thing, but it's the app interface is what's really cool about NutriSense. They connect you with your own personal dietitian. There's a lot there. It's ballpark $350 for a month. So it's steep, and it's not something though that most people need to do month after month after month. It is something you could do for 1 month. You would get 2 sensors and you get 14 days out of each sensor, and you would probably get the data you need in that 1 month. Abbott, which is the company that makes the sensor that goes into your arm with NutriSense, Abbott sells the sensor separately just through the pharmacy. And so your physician can put in an order for a continuous glucose monitor for you, whether you are diabetic or not. And Abbott has it set as such from most major pharmacies that is not to be more than $75. So I found that it's usually $70 or $75 for that month. Still pricey, but a lot less pricey than $350. It also has an app interface. It's not nearly as intuitive and engaging as that NutriSense app is, but you still see it. And so I will get the Abbott that my physician can call in, and it's $75 for the month. I'll have those sensors, and they're again 2-week sensors. You get they last 14 days. And sometimes, just like, as a dietitian, or different foods that we're doing, or different recipes that we're doing for our Fuel Cafe at Oshner Fitness Center, whatever it might be, I'm just interested to see how's it going to affect glucose levels. And so I may put it I'll put on the continuous glucose monitor. You'll see it on like the back of someone's arm typically. And I'll put that in, a few times throughout the year, because I'm just kind of interested in trying out different foods and seeing that effect on the glucose levels. But when I first used it a couple of years ago, I learned so much about what I was doing that I thought, as a dietitian with a couple of decades of experience, like I knew what I was doing and I knew how things affected me. I didn't. And I learned so much how it personally affected me. Our dietitians at Oshner Fitness Center, we've all used it. We've all tested them ourselves. And then our clients have used them. And same thing there. We realized that there's broad kind of blanket advice that we give as dietitians, and just really health professionals in general, like kind of what do we deem, the general advice that you would give someone before a workout or whatever it would be. But we realize that everyone is so individual in how they're processing foods, and especially something like carbohydrates. And so when my husband wore one, the same, during the same time I did, we would eat the same foods. And for him, he may spike up normally as glucose levels would if you eat carbohydrates, but then they would drop shortly after, which is also a healthy response if it doesn't plummet too quickly. Yet for me, in many of those instances, they may hover high and linger high, those glucose levels in my bloodstream for 6 or more hours. And so same foods, same circumstances we're eating, but we would handle it and process it very differently. So for me, the education that we get from a continuous glucose monitor, I would just encourage you to do it. If you can treat yourself to that $75 for that 1 month, I think you would learn a lot in that. It's also something that we have people who will ask for it, that'll be like their birthday gift either to themselves or that's the request. So it depends on kind of like how jazzed you are about it. If you want to use up a birthday gift for that. Personally, I think I love it. I love the data. I think it's really, really fun. So those are the handful of things that I think if someone says, beyond the usual, if you're like, okay, what are you doing like health wise? I incorporate some sort of physical movement daily. If for whatever reason I'm not getting a full workout in, I at least want to make sure I do the stretching or physical therapy type things that the physical therapist has guided me through for hip health and back health and stuff like that. So always doing some level of physical movement daily, focusing on nutrition. Of course, there's things that, plants and as many plants as possible and plant-based foods and fats as possible. There's a lot there. Staying hydrated. We've talked about alcohol and lack of alcohol a lot on this podcast. So there's a lot of things there that I think either or they're things that we've talked about. So then beyond those basics, what do I do? The creatine, the collagen, a modified version of intermittent fasting, continuous glucose monitor. And all of these are things that I will link to in the episode notes. I mentioned that we will have I'm actually going to be covering collagen for the Avenue magazine next month. So I'll link to that. And then I think the following month will be the intermittent fasting also for that same publication. So when I do that podcast in March, I will link to that as well. So trying to give y'all links for more resources for any of these things that may be catching your ear. So always, always, always let me know what you think. If you're incorporating one or some of these into your own life, I always want to hear about it. I am registered dietitian Molly Kimball, and you've been listening to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, the podcast. If you'd like more Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, please head over to mollykimball.com. And you can follow me, Molly Kimball RD, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And if you haven't yet, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Join us next week for another dose of Fueled Wellness and Nutrition. Thanks for listening and stay focused on living your strongest, healthiest life.